Hello, I'm Juliet Mann, and this is the Agenda podcast, CGTN Europe's one-stop shop for smart, in-depth discussion of the issues that really matter in the world today. China's President Xi Jinping and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi were among the world leaders to join Vladimir Putin in Kazan for the 2024 BRICS summit. It's the first such gathering since the group added new members: Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran and the United Arab Emirates. And if this week's discussions are anything to go by, BRICS is only set to get bigger, with countries from across the global south pushing to join up. So what does all this really mean for the global balance of power? Joining me now are Arkebe, Oqubay, former senior minister and special advisor to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, and now British Academy Global Professor at SOAS in London. Hussein, Haridy, Egypt's former Assistant Foreign Minister. Rashika Desai, Professor at the Department of Political Studies at the University of Manitoba and Director of the Geopolitical Economy Research Group. And Michele, Geraci, former Undersecretary of State at the Italian Ministry of Economic Development. What a panel. Thank you, all of you, for coming on the agenda. Arkebe, let me start with you, because this was the first BRICS summit since its expansion to include more countries than that original five, including, of course, Ethiopia. What difference would you say that's made?
The expansion of BRICS and its first session this year has significant implication, and also it's an important political statement. First, in terms of diversity and inclusiveness, now 3 African countries are members of BRICS, which account about 20% of Africa's population, as well as accounting to a third of Africa's GDP. In Middle East, we can also see that the 3 new members also have significant economic size, close to 2 trillion, and they are 1/5 of oil producers globally. And this brings a new energy and dynamism. So it's not about diversity, but also they come up with significant strengths. And this is now symbolic because it's the first time that BRICS has expanded since its establishment in 2010. And all these member countries, one common factor has been the strong development aspiration and also interest to reform the global governance system.
Hussein, I wonder, do you agree with all of that from an Egyptian perspective?
Yes, definitely. From an Egyptian point of view, I would like to add that brings to our memories that we cherish as far as Egyptian foreign policy is concerned, the history of the non-aligned movement and the developing countries of the third world, now they are called the global south, had a voice in international politics and pursued a foreign policy that protected and defended their national interests away from polarization of the Cold War years. With the coming of the Biden administration, there is a new, what I would call a new Cold War spirit governing international politics. And we here in Egypt, we have suffered from the polarization that the Biden administration has caused in the last 3 years and a half. And with our membership in BRICS, we hope that this new grouping in international politics would play a stabilizing role and would prevent further polarization of the international system.
So let's talk a little bit more about that global landscape, Rashika, because economic cooperation has really been at the heart of BRICS, and the IMF has reported that the combined GDP of its members now outstrips that of the G7. But how do you think that the global landscape has changed since that last BRICS summit? And I wonder what impact that might be having then on the group's shared goals.
Yeah, I mean, sure, absolutely. Economic cooperation is absolutely central. And that is what this particular phase, you can say, of South-South cooperation represented by the BRICS, that's a continuous with the earlier phase, which gave rise to the non-aligned movement and the demand for the new international economic order, which was revived as recently as September of 2022. So in all of those ways, there is a continuity, and development is absolutely at the core. Now, you ask, how have things changed since the last meeting? Well, first of all, there has been the expansion, and I would say that's huge, because you have to understand that the differences among the BRICS also exist. So every time any concrete step is taken, it represents that minimum of agreement that's still possible despite the differences. And I think that is very significant that they were able to invite all these new members. But there are some other things. This expansion includes Iran, which since the last summit has become the target of significant attack. And I think that's important. And it seems to me that there will be a fair degree of agreement within the BRICS to stand behind Iran. And I think the commentary in the West is beginning to register that they have to take BRICS seriously.
Michele, I want to bring you in now, because we keep talking about this non-aligned perspective. And Vladimir Putin has said that he hoped that BRICS would challenge what he calls Western hegemony. And that's a key goal of China's foreign policy too, isn't it? So I wonder what you take it to mean and how maybe this meeting might have moved that agenda forward.
Idea that Putin has, and I had a chance to talk to him directly, is that, of course, he believes that the era of US hegemony is over. And, of course, he personally lived through the early 90s with the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the beginning and the birth of the unipolar world with the US dominance. So now, after 25 years, he, with Xi Jinping, Modi, and others, they don't really want to have a hegemony substitution. So the BRICS will become an hegemonic power on the rest of the world. Rather, they want to, in a way, destroy the philosophy of zero-sum game that is embedded in the DNA of us, Western leaders and the US, where if I win, you must lose, and move on into something that, of course, is promoted by China, win-win, shared benefits, where if you win, I also win. And if I may, I use a metaphor. The Western countries see the relations with other countries like a tennis match. If I win, you lose. The Global South and the BRICS are trying to develop something that is more like a dancing tango, where you need to dance well so that I can also dance well. And if you fall, I will fall. It is hard, but it is reassuring that, especially these days of crisis and wars, we have a group of countries that do not want to supplant. In fact, I think Putin said any NATO, EU member that wants to join the BRICS can do so. And I, as a politician in Italy, want to see Italy to be part of the capital of the new development bank, the BRICS bank. So I personally, as a politician, I want Italy to be involved in this new phenomenon. It's not an alliance. We don't want to be left out. We don't want to be 7 countries against 193 in the rest of the world. We want to be part of these new forms of cooperation. I didn't call them alliance, that goes across the development of infrastructure, exchanges, find alternatives, not to replace, but to counterbalance the hegemony, so that the world becomes more balanced now that India and China especially will soon return to the role that has always been theirs since 2000 years, which is the 2 largest economies of the world. The dominance of the West is a blip in the last 180 years in the history of mankind.
It's interesting, the analogy you use, that the dancing, although the tango you picked is particularly technical. But look, President Xi put it like this. He says that the world is really well, they want to be a pillar of global multipolarity. So, Arkebe, I wonder how close you think BRICS is to achieving that goal of becoming a real global power, but of a multipolar world rather than one which is bipolar.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, the BRICS has emerged as an important representation or a pillar of the global multipolarity. And to understand this, we have to bear in mind that the current global order the foundation was laid at the end of World War II. And then one of the key milestones has been the establishment of the Bretton Woods institutions, for instance. And on major issues, even after 8 years now, it's mainly G7 countries which decide major issues. If we remember last year, the African Union presented a case on taxation of multinational corporations, and United Nations majority members supported it unanimously with the exception of G7 countries. So this clearly establishes the global order needs to shift because it has excluded over 80% of world population. It has excluded major economic players. In 1944 or 45, the global GDP was only 4 trillion. Now it's $110 trillion. If we look at global population or world population, it was only about 2 billion population. Now it's almost 8 billion. So the world has changed, but the global governance has not shifted. And now the new BRICS have a significant economic contribution to the global order. And they are also major players in global transformation as well. And I want to highlight, for instance, on the global green transformation, in the fight against climate change, it's not the wealthy countries that are at the forefront. The global leaders in green transformation are the BRICS country presented by China as well as India. So this is bringing that a new global multipolarity, and I fully agree with President Xi's statement.
Rashika, I can see you nodding vociferously there about the clout that the BRICS could have as a unit. Yet Jim O'Neill, the economist who coined the acronym BRICS back in 2001, he said, "I'm not sure what fruitful purpose it serves other than being a club that the US is not part of." I mean, what do you think? Or is that a too typically Western view?
Well, you know, it is a bit disappointing to see that the man who had the prescience to see back at the turn of the century that China and India as the two most human resource intensive countries and Russia and Brazil as the two most natural resource intensive countries had the capacity to essentially shift the center of gravity of the world economy away from the West, where it has been only, as I think Michele quite rightly pointed out. I was smiling when he said that because that's exactly the term I used in my class the other day. I said that this Western dominance has been a blip if you look at the longer span of human history. So Jim O'Neill could see that already at the turn of the century. And remember, we were still at the height of the triumphalism about how the United States had won the Cold War and that we were in a unipolar moment and we would enjoy a peace dividend. Of course, we have enjoyed nothing of the sort. So it's too sad to see that this guy is now engaged in the collective burial of the head in the sand thing that the West is doing. If you read the Western papers, you'd never know that such an important summit was taking place in Kazan. You'd never know de-dollarization was on the agenda. And I think they are in denial about not just one thing, which is, yes, the BRICS represent a kind of a non-Western bloc, if not anti-Western bloc. And it has to be non-Western because, as Oqubay just said, the fact is that they are being kept out by the countries that dominate the institutions of international economic governance. So they have to create alternatives. They've tried very hard to try to reform the IMF, the World Bank, etc. So now they have to do something else. So that's what they're doing. And so it's a different philosophy of international economic governance, but there's something else. the BRICS represent in potential and will increasingly be pushed towards, if they wish to continue robust growth, continue development, away from the kind of pro-corporate governance which has been the downfall of the West, because this shift in the center of gravity is taking place because of the rise of the other countries, the BRICS and other countries, but also because of the relative decline of the West, which is because they are pursuing policies that are self-destructive. You can't just promote the interests of a small number of corporations and expect the whole economy to thrive.
And yet there are big issues that a lot of the members have different opinions on. So Michele, I want to bring you back in here because, so many global entities. And I'm thinking the European Union, for example, have a problem speaking with one voice on any number of issues. How much of a problem is that within BRICS too?
It is a problem. You very smartly, if I may, pointed out, and I didn't use the tango metaphor by chance. Tango is difficult and challenging, and it does need a lot of coordination and preparation. When it works very well. But indeed, there are problems because these are 10, maybe growing to 15 countries that have different economic structures. Rashika mentioned one is a population, the others are resources, other types of resources. Remember, the new BRICS together now control 45% of the overall world oil reserve. So half of the oil is inside the BRICS. So this is not a group of countries that we should wage commercial wars against. The European Union, sadly, is a non-entity in the global arena. It has no common foreign policy. It has no common view of which way to look at. I must also, even more sadly, admit that the level of knowledge, skills of the current ministers, and I don't mention names, of the 27 countries, is not adequate to face the complexity of today's challenges.
Let's talk a little bit more about expansion. Hussein, Putin has said that there are around 30 countries who are interested in joining or cooperating more closely with BRICS. What's really in it for countries like Egypt?
No, I guess it's politics, international security, regional security, and a host of other issues that are of major concern, not only for Egypt, but for African and Arab countries, like, for instance, climate change and the negative impact that the climate change has on our economies. So as far as Egypt is concerned, it's more of a comprehensive approach to the future of the international system. I wouldn't say that our interests, our national interests, have been greatly served by the polarization taking place in the world today. Economically and financially, we have suffered. We have suffered a lot during the last 3 years because of the war in Ukraine. And I'm not going to get into the true causes of the outbreak of this war. But definitely, we have welcomed the attitude taken by the Kazan summit of the BRICS Plus countries in this week about calling for a peaceful settlement of the war of Ukraine. And if there is a country in the world that wants to see that happening, not tomorrow, but right now, it's Egypt. So this is one point. The second point is that, of course, being a member in this club of I would say, big powers, emerging power. For instance, India is projected to become the third economic power in the world by the year 2030. So we believe that being a member in this club of nations that are not seeking hegemony over world politics would magnify the role of Egypt on the international scene and in the meantime would help us defend our interests, whether in the region or worldwide, whether we are speaking about security questions, regional security, or international affairs. Yeah. And so we are hopeful in Egypt, in Cairo, we are very hopeful about our membership and about the potential of an enlarged BRICS in the future of the world order.
The conflict in Ukraine was not off the table. You know, China's President Xi called on BRICS members to work for peace and act as guardians of common security and to help de-escalate the situation in Ukraine specifically. Can BRICS now be in a position to be a genuine peacemaker across the world?
Well, I mean, that's a very big question because there are so many different moving parts to the situation in Ukraine. It seems to me that insofar as we are going to see peace in Ukraine, and it'll probably come in some form, probably only after the election in the United States, but nevertheless, it'll probably come. And that will really be determined by Russia's gains on the ground, which are substantial from what I understand. So that the reality on the ground will be created. And it seems that President Zelensky has increasingly been signaling that he is willing to talk, because it's becoming very clear that the West is no longer in a position where it can keep fueling this unwinnable war, in which, in any case, you know, it is Ukrainians who are dying. I mean, as John Mearsheimer pointed out, the West is fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian, and we're almost at the last Ukrainian. So things are pretty bad for Ukraine. So that's one. So I don't think much will have to be done by the BRICS per se, although, of course, they would like to see the principles that they have always avowed, the original principles of the UN Charter, the principles of mutual cooperation, respect for sovereignty, et cetera, and they will be abided by in any peace agreement that comes about. But it's also the case that the BRICS countries are making substantial effort to try to resolve conflict among BRICS members, and I think that is also a very good thing.
Arkebe, BRICS isn't just about what's going on geopolitically or about economics. There's also those people-to-people connections which are so important. And President Xi announced those plans in his speech to establish 10 overseas learning centres in BRICS countries to provide training opportunities for 1,000 education administrators, for teachers, for students. Do you think we're going to see more of this kind of type of agreement between members?
An enduring partnership has basically to involve the people-to-people communication. If you look from the broader perspective, we want BRICS to bring higher economic growth. We want BRICS to play an important role in poverty reduction. As we know, a key problem in many low-income developing countries is ending poverty. So this is one major pillar. There are multiple opportunities that have been highlighted. For instance, partnership among think tanks, exchanges, partnership among parliamentarians among the member countries. In addition to this, also the pillar cooperation is not only among BRICS countries, but also championing the issues of the Global South, which by now, as we all know, 75% of world's population lives in emerging and developing countries. So the ideas and the suggestions that have been proposed so far are absolutely important, but I believe this is a work in progress, and new additional initiatives are going to come, as we have seen during the implementation of the China-Africa partnership or cooperation, as we all know, during FOCAC first, and also the subsequent FOCAC summits until the most recent in September in Beijing. Various initiatives were taken that brought every time the partnership into a much more stronger and solid level.
We very briefly touched on the green transition and on innovation and on the economy, but I'm quite conscious we haven't really talked about shaking up global financial systems. Michele, where do you see the future for BRICS?
I think the path of the de-dollarization is going to be a difficult and a slow one. And I do know that countries do not really want their own currency to become an international currency, because that creates a lot of problem on the balance of payments and the gains from the so-called seigniorage, and people around the world flocking to buy government bonds like the US does. Is actually is probably actually a negative thing. So you don't want foreigners to hold your debt. You want to keep the debt within your citizen, like Japan does, even if he has a very high level of debt. So I don't think there is going to be any new BRICS currency, because that also brings a second point, that all the currency need to be locked into a fixed exchange regime, which would destroy completely the economies of the BRICS countries. So you cannot create a new country. You can do what it's been done now, like Russia and China. They trade and settle their goods in either renminbi or rubles, or with India on rupees. And as long as there is let's say, a statistically large enough number of BRICS countries, you could think that you could trade a rupee, even where the trade does not directly involve India, because then the recipient, say Saudi Arabia, would probably need to buy goods from India, just like we do with the dollar. So I'm a little bit not very enthusiastic about this idea of de-dollarization. No, I believe it is in the interest of the countries, but with the meaning that I don't see a new reserve currency, but I do see using other currency instead of the dollar, even, I say provocatively, going back to some kind of barter system where, I don't know, Saudi Arabia sells 1 barrel of oil and buys $100 worth of solar panels from China, and that transaction can be done with the zero exchange of money of any currencies.
Michele, Geraci, Arkebe, Oqubay, Rashika, Desai, and Hussein Haridy, thank you all very much.
Thank you, madam.
Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more agenda content on CGTN Europe's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube channels. Until next time, goodbye.
The most interesting questions.
Are there other living beings beyond Earth?
Will man or machine be in charge?
Great question.
Always have more than one answer.
Well, hold on, let me just draw up a list.
And always come from more than one person.
That's where the credibility lies.
The concept of having a machinery which is alive and evolving didn't wait for us.
The end of inequality of incomes and wealth around the world, can you imagine how difficult that is at the moment to achieve?
Every episode, Stephen Cole, Murray Beveridge, and some of the brightest minds out there shed light on the answers to some of the most intriguing questions.
There are two ways of looking at this.
Machines can't really discriminate between civilian and military targets.
The Answers Project.
Maybe we need to just look at this in a bit more detail.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
The Answers Project, a new podcast from CGTN Europe.